And with that, I'm really happy to introduce my good friend and colleague, the CEO and founder of Strangeworks and Austin entrepreneurial legend, William Whurley.
All right, I think I have 45 minutes. I'll do my best to make sure we stay on schedule. However, I can't get the clicker to work. So I was gonna like wander over there and wander over there, but I might be having to hang out here a little bit. How many people already know about quantum computing? Because I have to start there. How many of you are lying? Just, it's okay. We're all friends here. It's okay. Yeah, so when I first thought about this talk, I thought, you know, it's gonna be kind of hard to get it. And do I just hit the next because the space bar did not work? There we go. And so you know who I am. So I thought I'd kick this one off. Once upon a time, in 2016, I had the best South by Southwest ever. I was fortunate enough to host the first president that came to South by on Friday, and then to go on CNBC on Monday and say, I sold my company to Goldman Sachs. And it was awesome. And there was a really cool article like, Whurley wins South by. And I was like, but if you knew how much I had to be like, no, there's nothing political going on at all in my life. And then you're like, what? Finance? No way. It was an incredible weekend. And I ended up at Goldman Sachs. And as an entrepreneur, I was trying to figure out what I could do next, but I thought, well, this is an incredible platform. I'd really like to do something cool. And so I wanted to work on quantum computing. And I tried to get them to quantum computing, and they had some stuff going on, but back in 2016, nobody really cared if they didn't work in quantum computing. And so I said, you know, why don't you let me do whatever I want? I have a big open source background. I'll start a big community project. It'll be awesome. And they're like, okay, we'll look at that. And while they were looking at that, I started a thing with the IEEE called the IEEE Quantum Computing Standards Working Group. And what I found out was that no one in quantum computing wanted standards, because then there's a way to measure things, right? And so the argument is that, you know, oh, well, we can't, you know, have that measured because then people might know this or that, and the ruler wouldn't be accurate. And it doesn't matter, it's kind of a precision versus accuracy thing. It doesn't matter if the ruler is accurate, it just matters we're all being measured with the same ruler. So there's some kind of comparison. But after that, I tried to start a Linux Foundation project. Are you guys familiar with the Linux Foundation? So I got together with Linus and Brian, everybody. I said, great news, I'm gonna build open source quantum computing software for all the hardware guys. And in the summer of 2017, we got everyone together at IBM's offices in California, and no one wanted to work together. Everybody was gonna own one vertically integrated stack, and they were gonna be worth trillions of dollars, and there would be no competition, and that project died a horrible death. And on the way out of the room, Jackson Sheehan, who was employee number one, said, what are you gonna do now? And I said, well, you know, screw it, I guess I'm gonna start another company. And my wife calls it my sci-fi company. And since then, I've written 2 amazingly technical books. The first one being Quantum Computing for Babies, which I don't have copies of, but the second one being Quantum Computing for Dummies, which super cool, turns out was translated into German and is even harder to read, I guess, because we were in Germany last week and I gave some copies away and somebody's like, do you want this back? But I brought copies, I brought 18 copies. And so if you are on, I don't care, Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever, and you tag at Whurley and at Austin Forum, is that right, Jay? Okay, whoever gets the most reposts, likes, whatever, I have 18 signed copies of the book and I'll give them away. So a little incentive there for you to try to help us with the socials. But let's set the stage and start with, this isn't a future technology. It's not fusion or fission, or this is real. Strangeworks has customers using it now. All these companies you're gonna hear about tonight have progress they've made. Is it where it's advertised? Probably not. Does it have a long way to go? Absolutely. The way I like to think about it is 1959, Jack Kilby invents the integrated circuit at Texas Instruments. Before that, you bought transistors one at a time because they only went in transistor radios, all right? And so if you think of the revolution from there all the way through the supercomputers we have today and the iPhones in our pocket and all of that, we're still kind of in the infancy with quantum computing. However, the pace is much more dramatic. So you can take all of that time frame from 1959 now, cram it down in the next 5 to 10 years, and that's probably the pace of evolution you're going to see on these technologies. And this comes on the heel of 125 years of quantum mechanics. So the physics of it isn't super new. And when you get over here into the 80s, 1980, Mark Benioff and Richard Feynman wrote a paper, The Computer as a Physical System, and basically argued that, the information is physical. There's, the digital stuff's not really the way to look at it. And you could basically create, something using atomic particles and store that data and use it to calculate. And between there and 1994, Peter Shor came up with Shor's algorithm, still probably the most famous algorithm. And then you had, some programs with IBM and some other stuff, but it's like, you don't see a whole lot of progress until about last year. Right. So Strangeworks was founded in December of 2017. We're in our 8th year. I've been interested and active in this space for about 10 years now almost. And now you're starting to see amazing kind of things that are taking it from science fiction to science fact. We're going to cover a lot of stuff today. We're not going to cover a lot of the technical stuff. But for those of you who don't know how quantum computers work, we'll give you a very kind of the baby's book version. All right. Think of the phone in your pocket, has all these transistors, it has a gate, it's a 1 or a 0, and it can be in one of those positions. So if I have 4 bits, I can be in 16 potential outcomes. I can be in any one of those registers at once. Now, take something like a salt atom, blow it up, pull an electron off, freeze it down cold as space, colder than space, almost absolute 0, trap it with lasers, do something to contain and manipulate it, and put information on it. And if I have 4 of those, I still have the same 16 outcomes, but I can be in all 16 outcomes at one moment in time until the system collapses, at which point I get an answer. So quantum computers are a little bit of a black box. And so the great thing is, if I take those 4 bits and I say, well, let me add a bit, I go to 25, that's awesome, still 1 register. If I have 4 qubits and add a qubit, I have 2 to the n the number of bits. So these systems grow exponentially in every way that you can imagine. And it's a big investment. 2 trillion in value going to be created by 2035 by the World Economic Forum, 1.3 across just 4 industries, $1 trillion in the global economy by business economy, 150 billion added to the US GDP. So there's a lot of stuff. And as you can see there's a lot of countries investing in it, right? China has already put $10 billion in it. The UK, 2.5. There is a ton of investment. And if you know your history of technology, a lot of times things start with the government investment. Think of the internet and ARPA and DARPA, and then it goes into the regular investors and it gets into the public markets. And then eventually we all fund the new cell phone stuff, right? Because we all have them, we all use them, and there's an economy built. That's probably a few years away for quantum. It's probably not as far as you think it is. So this matters right now. I've been talking the same story for 8 years, and now you're seeing technologists, people in innovation departments in companies like BP and J&J and Raytheon and PepsiCo and others all paying attention. And most importantly, you're starting to see interest in the public markets and in the public. And the reason you're starting to see that is there were some announcements we'll talk about a little later that kicked off a big peak in companies that had went public because that was kind of the only place to get money. And all of a sudden that stock took off. And now everybody on Wall Street knows about quantum computing, right? And every day trader knows about quantum computing. And every day there's a Motley Fool article that's like the top 3 quantum computing stocks to pick. And you're like, but there's only 3. So they're all in the top. But it's real. There's tons of companies using this. I mean, not just the ones I mentioned, but BASF and Ford and BBVA and others, tons of companies, over 100 companies in the Fortune 500 doing some sort of proof of concept, some sort of experimentation with this technology. And so that leads us into kind of, well, that sounds great, Whurley. What's the state of quantum today? Like, where are we actually at? And that leads me to probably what I think will be the most informative, one of the most informative parts of the talk, which is who are the key players, what are they working on, and what's going on? Because I mentioned those standards earlier, and those really kick in when we start looking at hardware, right? So you've got superconducting qubits, and you've got trapped ions, you've got neutral atoms, and quantum photonics, and silicon, spin, and there's a ton of companies in there. So obviously, Google and Microsoft and IBM and Rigetti, these are kind of the ones in the superconducting side. And you can see a bunch of other companies up there. I'm sorry if they're too small. I want to try to fit as many on there as possible. But if you look at this, these are all hardware companies building hardware today, and all different hardware companies building hardware across 5 modalities. But guess what? There's probably 15, right? And we're not even talking about those. These are just the ones that are seeing traction in the market, that have some progress in the labs and science. And so these are all different ways of manipulating, some atomic particle to use to compute on. And which one will win, we don't know. Now, if you work at one of these companies, obviously yours is going to win, right? But in reality, there's so much to learn, right? And so, some of the big companies, big people are like, well, IBM and everybody put their bet, Google put their bet on superconducting. Obviously, that's going to be the winner. Maybe trapped ions are great. There's a publicly traded company, IonQ, has a lot of stuff in that space. They just acquired another company, similar. Neutral atoms. The government's been working with those for a long time, some of the labs. So, do they know better than Google or IBM or better than the other guys? This is very, very hard. It's very confusing when you are an enterprise and you say, okay, what are we going to use? And so that's why, I try to take a very neutral approach. Use whatever you want on my platform. Of any of them, I don't care, right? And I think it's going to be some consolidation within these spaces in the market. And I think there's going to be consolidation across these spaces. And if that wasn't confusing enough, there's a bunch of alternative approaches. So I put annealing in the alternative approach. Some of you probably heard about D-Wave. It's not a slam against them. There are so many people that will say that that's not quantum or whatever. Professor Nishimori, who's one of the 2 guys who invented annealing, is an advisor of my company. I thoroughly believe it is, but I put it as alternative because you're starting to see all of this interest on the other side of the hardware. And then you have quantum inspired. So Hitachi, Fujitsu, Toshiba, and NEC all have things like Toshiba's simulated bifurcated quantum, inspired machine. And they do stuff that's probably close enough for you to do stuff. And they use classical, techniques that are quantum inspired. And so companies can buy one, put it in a rack, use it today. And that makes a big difference for a lot of businesses. They're like, oh, well, I can get that. I use NEC, I use Fujitsu. Quantum computers are expensive too, and they're very price competitive. But now think about this as you're a CEO or a CTO. And I haven't even shown you all of the options or any of the really other stuff that's out there. It's a super confusing space. It's a nascent space, but it's a space that's advancing tremendous progress. And so if we look at some of the significant milestones, back in 2023, IBM said, look, we're on a path to have 1,121 qubits, and it's going to unlock the ability to solve problems that no classical supercomputer can solve. And they've got that roadmap out there, and they've been making progress every year. A lot of progress, and that's great. But in December, we had the event that changed all of quantum history. In December, Google published on their blog about a white paper that they published in August, which I don't know why nobody saw it then, about a chip called Willow. And they use a thing called random circuit sampling, right? Now, random circuit sampling, okay for measuring a computer, not really something that translates into a real-world application. And there's nothing wrong with that. Again, if we all use the same measure, I'm fine with that. But what it did in 5 minutes would have taken the world's largest supercomputer 10 septillion years. Not 10 million times as fast. It would have taken it a 10 with 25 zero in years to complete that same thing. And when that dropped, quantum stocks that were, looking like they might get delisted, they're down in the dollar range, you had Rigetti and D-Wave and others, all of a sudden just took off, worth billions of dollars overnight. And this is where the public interest really came from, right? And so you had, a lot of interest driven in there. And then a little bit later, Microsoft announced that they had found a new state of matter. Now, no qubits associated with this. I want to be really clear, but they're working on a topological qubit, which in theory, one of those would be super powerful compared to a whole bunch of regular qubits. But they found a new state of matter in which that's how they're going to operate their qubit system. So if you think about that, that stuff fascinates me. I mean, you're in this nascent space, it's developing very fast. You've got, big machines, big numbers, and you've got a completely new state of matter that's never been discovered before, that's potentially going to be the basis of a computer, right? And that is super, super, super exciting. And so that's the hardware side. Lots of cool stuff going on in hardware. And so now we get to like, well, what's going on the software side? I'm on the software side. I think software is the most important thing. I think, the IBM Microsoft relationship, we're going to build PCs and all of a sudden all the value adhere to software. I think without people like you using this hardware and experimenting, there's no feedback loop to understand what, they need to improve, what they need to do, what they need to offer you. So I think software is super important. Again, said as a software person. But when you look at that, there's kind of 4 frameworks that you can use. Now, there's a lot more than this. And we don't have a lot of time tonight. So again, I'm kind of picking out some of the ones that are more popular, more available, and have more training materials and stuff you guys can actually use. Because my goal is at the end of the night, you go out and learn more, you play with something, you actively do something. So you've got Circ by Google, which is awesome. You've got Qiskit by IBM. You've got Q Sharp by Microsoft. And then on the more classical side, you have CUDA Quantum by NVIDIA. Now, the NVIDIA machines, GPUs, are being used to help design the quantum systems. They're also being used to simulate the quantum states and tie it into, how people are going to program on them. And these 4 frameworks are not the only ones at all by any measure. There's 24 of them we support. But these are kind of the 4 big ones. And the reason I put them up there is these are companies you guys probably all have some relationship with or trust or some knowledge of, and they all have really good documentation, the tutorials and things that you can go, again, tonight and play around with some of these things if you're a software developer. And that's awesome, but here's the big problem on the software side. There's not enough access and there's not enough abstraction. If you need a physicist or a discrete mathematician or a team of them and some computer scientists to use a machine in an enterprise company, you have a total addressable market of 0, okay? And so one of the things I set out to do originally was, I'm gonna make every software developer a quantum developer. I think there's probably a recording of me saying that on stage, and let me just tell you in hindsight, that is stupid. Hey, I could not have been more off. Because, if you're using the Microsoft kit we talked about, you're using one of those katas and it says, whoops, like entanglement broke. And you're like, all right, what now, right? Or teleportation did not occur or whatever. So that was maybe a little bit of a too lofty goal, but I've stuck with the goal, which is now I'm like, I want everybody to use quantum computers. Because, if I'm gonna go all in. But I really want the industry to focus on every tool everywhere available all at once. It's what my company is, but it's what everybody should do. You as a user, you as a consumer should be able to access a plethora of machines and different software libraries and should have some abstraction layer. And what I think is going to settle that is artificial intelligence. And so artificial intelligence and quantum computing to me are symbiotic and very related. And there's a ton of people that'll argue that with me, but my point is that in one, you're trying to take and simulate nature and the brain is a computational place, and then the other you're trying to use nature to compute on. And those two go together because quantum mechanics is hard and we don't understand everything about it. And we could use some AI co-scientists to help, discover new discoveries and drive that forward. And at the same time, AI is already making calculations that may only make sense on a quantum computer, right? Algorithms that may only run there. And so I think the code and the physics barriers get removed by AI. And I think you get into an interface where you literally are speaking about your project as a subject matter expert or a scientist, talking about the actual problem. And the future is not just going to be quantum. It's going to be heterogeneous. It's going to be quantum first. It's going to be quantum heavy. But in the future, I want to just tell the machine what I'm trying to solve. And then I want it to take that, break it down into first principles and say, CPU, GPU, TPU, QPU, BPU, biological stuff, right? Cortical Labs has a new system out that's synthetic neurons, right? All of computing is going to change more by the end of this decade than is changed in the entire history of computing. I mean, we talk about how a quantum computer works. What I often don't mention enough is, and do you realize it's a non-von Neumann architecture? Every computer is a von Neumann architecture. It's the first non-von Neumann architecture. Every computer is a Boolean system. It's the first non-Boolean system. It is the first evolution of computers in the history of computing. And it's going to do incredible things for the world. And it's going to change our capabilities from a scientific perspective in ways we can't possibly imagine. So that leads us to, how could it change it? Now, somebody on LinkedIn asked a question about Bitcoin. I don't know if that person is here. If they are, I would like them to raise their hand. I will be picking on you. No? Okay. All right. Maybe they're not, but maybe they'll see the video. But we think about applications. What do we think about it doing? Well, they threw out a, how would quantum computers break Bitcoin? Like, how long would it take to hack a private key? And this is the most popular question I get, followed only by, in Google's press release, they said that what they did when they solved that problem in 5 minutes, it took 10 septillion years. Lends credence to David Deutsch's theory that we live in a multiverse, and quantum computation can only happen across all of those universes. And when an investor asks me that, I'm just like, I've got to go. But let's take a look at what that would do, because we used to think to break a 256 bit ecliptic curve cryptography, it would take 6 million qubits. In 2014, that was the estimate. And let's be very blunt, we don't know, right? There's all just theoretical math and estimates. Last year, or rather this year, last year it was 6 million. This year, it was 1 million. And so if you go and you look at the papers and you look at the research, what you see here is there's been a 20-fold decrease in the estimates for RSA 2048 as we've increased, and it's getting faster and faster. We thought it was, 6 million. We thought the problem, this paper we're talking about with 1 million falls right here. And so not only are the computers getting more qubits and getting more powerful, but we're starting to understand more the effect of those qubits on that math, and it's getting less and less in the complexity of how many qubits it would take. So does this mean, again, most popular question, all encryption is going to be broken? Of course it is. Guys, we were in Germany last week. They weren't using the Enigma machine to do any banking transactions. All right. Like, security is an ever-changing dance of threat and remediation, and it goes back and forth, and there'll be quantum, post-quantum cryptography, and there'll be ways quantum computer do things. There'll be a quantum internet where when you have two entangled particles, the simple act of you trying to observe that will break everything, and it'll decohere, and you won't understand anything about what I'm communicating. So everything in security is going to change, and that doesn't even count AI, right? Because you're not going to have a whole app store. You're going to have a phone that you say, hey, set this appointment, find me a reservation, I'll solve this problem, do that, and that software will be written in real time, and when it's done running, it'll be deleted, right? So everything in security is going to change anyway. Do not fear quantum computer or let people do a bunch of fear mongering around that. But what's it going to do in medicine and healthcare? We've already worked with companies in this space to do peptide, right, discovery. So amino acid chains, what things will bond in a wet lab and what won't, predicting them, coming up with ways to optimize those paths, and that's already produced chains that will bond in the lab. So like 100%, that's an effect on it. Now, small experiments, again, it's the early days of quantum computing. It's not, but it does work, and it's being applied, and it's only going to get better and faster and more efficient at doing these things. Small molecules, right? Exploring them, starting to look at simulation as these qubits counts get higher. If you wanted to simulate a coffee molecule, it would take an incredible amount of resource from a processor and a memory standpoint, but it only take like less than 200 qubits, right? Because you can do a one-for-one simulation, basically a digital twin, if you will. So that's really, really important. Material science, I give a speech on particle physics, from playgrounds to particle physics, and in that I basically argue that the world's got a lot of problems, disease, and our ability to grow crops and all this. One of those problems is energy. We're going to probably use about 700 exajoules of energy in 2025, and we haven't really discovered any new ways of making energy or better ways to store them and all of this. This is where quantum computing can affect it. Better battery technologies, right? Better, potentially new forms of energy. Maybe quantum computing can help make, the fission and fusion dreams real, right? So very, very big impacts on that. You get to finance and optimization of finance, portfolio optimization, right? Where is high frequency trading led to? right? Trades happen so fast now. Like, what do we do? How's there going to be more hedge funds making more money? How's there going to be more people having more balanced portfolios in the 401k? What about completely new ways of looking at the market when you can look at potentially all of these variables and see all of the potential outcomes at once? Finance is going to be very, very hit by quantum, and they're already adopting. In fact, I would argue that it's between finance and pharma who is adopting it faster, right, in those two industries. And so that leads us into, all right, so how do we navigate all of this? And by the way, I just want to, is this pace okay for you guys? Because I'm trying to save up as much time for question and answers and still get us out of here because we started late, so good. All right, so, we talk about navigating the quantum frontier, we say, okay, well, all right, that's all the cool stuff. So there's a bunch of people working in it. There's a bunch of money being put in it by governments and VCs and everybody. Hey, some of it's working for some of these companies you've talked about. What are the problems? Like, why don't I have access to quantum computer now? Why isn't it 1 million qubits now breaking all the encryption in the world? Well, one of those things is the decoherence and the noise. A lot of these systems, and not all of them, some of them don't decohere for a considerable amount of time. But if you look at some of these, they decohere, meaning that we want to entangle those qubits to do that calculation. And then they basically are entangled, and then they decohere, and that entanglement breaks, which breaks down our system that we're using. Some of that happens sub-second. Some of it happens in under 40 seconds. Some of it takes a lot longer. But decoherence is a big challenge, and so is noise. Adding a qubit is not super difficult. Adding a qubit without the fidelity of the system going absolutely to crap is difficult, right? And then we have too much noise and we can't get the signal out that we're trying to get the answer we're trying to get out of the system. So that's one of the things that, is really, really important. And again, every quantum hardware vendor you talk to will have a different answer on this and be in a different state. Some of them have solved more of this than others. And, it's a very nascent place, but these are still two big challenges in this area. And then you get to error correction and fault tolerance. Google's Willow announcement, probably the biggest part of it that, got everybody's attention was around error correction. And so how do you do error correction? In a classical computer, we have extra bits and we use those things, check the math, and we know how that works. In a quantum machine, a little bit different. And they basically showed a system of how they would do error correction and how that error correction could scale as the number of qubits scaled. And if you're interested and have a technical bent, you should go read that paper. It's very interesting. And then you should go read all of the comments of all the people who are like, nope, that's not how it works. It works this other way. Because Bob Metcalf, when I first started this company, told me, he goes, what's going to be funny for you? He said, the less there is to argue, the more the physicists are going to argue about it. And I now believe him. I think he was right. And then fault tolerance. How do we make sure that these machines, like when I take a Dell server and put it in a rack or a NVIDIA H100 box or whatever, I turn it on and it works and it always works. And I probably rarely have to restart the damn thing. Not the same with quantum computers. So many things can interfere with them. So many environmental interferences, so many different things that can happen, the decoherence, the noise is too much, maybe it's useless. These are, two more of the big challenges from a technical aspect. Scaling high quality qubits. There are companies that are doing this now. There are a lot of those techniques, a lot of those companies I mentioned who aren't quite there yet. We don't have 1 million qubit machine. We don't have a 10,000 qubit machine. And everyone you talk to has a different amount of effort it'll take that. Some of them, it's a multi-billion-dollar plan to get to 10,000 qubits. And those are physical qubits. You'll hear an argument about logical qubits, which you need way more physical qubits, like maybe 125 to 1, 500 to 1, whatever it is. But if you just work on physical qubits and just scaling those high quality qubits, there's still a lot to learn. There's still a lot to do, right? The best plan I've seen from a financial perspective is about $50 million to get to 10,000 qubits. The worst one I've seen is $5 billion. And that's a big gap in there. And again, there's other companies, right, that are already making progress on this. They're already doing things in this nature. And on that slide where we showed all the hardware, several of those are doing it, right? IBM's looking at that, IonQ's looking at that, Google's looking at that. There are people making progress, but again, as a software developer, I don't have 1 million qubit machine I can access to steal all of your Bitcoin. So we've got a ways to go. And And then new programming paradigms. This is what is really bugging me, is that I don't think that we have the right programming paradigms on one hand. And on the other hand, I don't think that we're going to program a 1,000,000 qubit machine. I just don't think that's what humans do. I think that starts getting in the area of a machine programming a machine, and why I put so much emphasis on the AI stuff. I say that having seen 100 companies, and 1,000 scientists from there who are really, really smart. A lot of them know quantum mechanics and know way more about it than I do. Try to program 20 qubits, 10 qubits, or whatever, and not get a result, and have issues, and laying out a lattice or whatever complexities that they're facing. And so, I think that quantum, and I'm trying to drive it there personally, becomes something that you program in natural language, and all the complexity is hidden through that abstraction layer, right? Down to from the microwave pulses at the bottom, manipulating a qubit on some of these systems, up through the control planes, up through the languages that they're using, effectively their machine language, all the way up to, the user. I think that's the role of AI. And I think we've given some demos that are online that you can go check out. We have a great one in Abu Dhabi that was really popular about that. We're not there. The industry's not there. Until then, I just think there's a lot of difficulty to setting up a programming. And I don't think we need more programming languages. I mean, if you were going to use a language, there is a language called APL, right? A programming language. And there's a book from 1963 by Iverson. And in it, you see that, the argument is like, oh, should not try to abstract that. You need to learn how to talk math if you're going to talk to a computer. And in that, it's all math matrices, which actually kind of makes sense in quantum. And you used to have a special keyboard with special symbols on it that you had to hit to program those things. And so my worry is we go back to there, or we go back to something else, when the fact is you're never going to get a software developer to be like, boom, I'm programming a quantum computer. That's just not going to happen. You will get a software developer with an AI co-pilot or AI assistant, they'll do amazing things. I definitely see that. I definitely buy into that. And so that leads to the talent and education gap. This is huge. I probably have in my LinkedIn everyone remotely touching quantum computer, whether they matter or not. And I'm going to tell you, we could fit them in Google's campus here easily. And the people that really matter, we could probably fit in this room really easily. There are not enough courses on quantum computing. There is not enough educational resources available in any format. It's very complex. It's computer science, some discrete math, it's quantum mechanics. We need to have universities turning out more students. And if they and look, a few years ago they started having quantum programs, quantum master, quantum this, quantum that. And when they did that, the problem is that's gonna be 6 or 8 years before that person's probably ready to work at a company like Strangeworks. And by then it's all gonna have changed so much. You all know the delta between what people are learning in school and how fast the industry moves. And this is even worse with even more complexity. And so bridging this talent and education gap is super, super important. And I've spoken to governments all over the world. I've talked to universities all over. I don't know how we do this. Like, we'll make a bunch more computer scientists and a bunch more physicists and then breed them and then have a physicist, computer scientist. Maybe we could do that. Like, I don't have an answer. I do not have an answer for this one at all. So if you hang out later, or we see each other later, or you see me on the street and you ask me about this one, I don't know. It is a question I get asked a lot. I can tell you what it's not. It's not just like, we're going to crank out a bunch more physicists and a bunch more computer scientists, right? That's not it. There's got to be new techniques we develop and the new educational courses around those techniques. And the world has got to change to keep up with the evolution of this technology. And so that leads me to my big thing, which is my thing since the beginning has been democratizing access. As I said, this is the first change in computing in the history of computing. It is not going to happen like the transistor. It is going to happen so fast. Like you go back to ChatGPT coming out. And like everybody was like, AI, maybe one day. And then everybody's like, I use AI every day, right? They have just announced right after WWDC and hiring, being like, Johnny Ives works here now. And then Apple did WWDC and they're like, by the way, we have $10 billion in ARR halfway through the year. They did 5 last year. That means they'll do almost $20 billion in revenue this year, right? And so if you think of when you heard about that, and even go all the way back to when it was founded, right? Which was a considerable time ago, but not that far ago. That's an incredible pace. And quantum computing is going to do that plus plus. And I fear that there's going to be people who can take part in that revolution and then everybody that gets left out of it. And I think it's super unfair. And I think hopefully AI can be a big part of democratizing that. We work with a lot of groups. We work with a group out of Switzerland called JESTA in Geneva, and they're trying to do this in, on the continent of Africa and throughout Europe and other places. We work with SQAI research labs that trying to get more university people into it in Japan, and working with all the universities there. Work with the World Economic Forum, just trying to push this whole quantum economy, thing. And I love all of these programs, but none of them are going to move fast enough. And this stuff is just going to start changing. I look back 8 years ago and I think about every year, kind of like your new iPhone, there was something significant that happened in quantum. And then about 5 years ago, it was like every 6 months. About 3 years ago, a couple of years ago, it started being like every month. And now it's every week. And you don't hear about them all because quantum was seen as overhyped. And why? It was seen as overhyped because if somebody moves 2 atoms and keeps the entanglement, and they move them just a little bit further apart, it could be groundbreaking science. It's big news, but it doesn't really mean anything to you or I or the business world. And that's how we got in that hype cycle. So now people have started being a little bit more discreet in what they say a little bit, but those advances are happening all the time, right? Monthly for sure, some months weekly, right? And so it's kind of an iceberg. You don't see everything under the water. You just see the tip of it. And you go, oh, that's cool. Quantum computing, super nascent. And then it's going to dethrone global 2000 companies. It's going to change the balance of global power. I mean, you saw how much China invested. Why do you think they're doing that? Why is the UK investing? Why is Japan investing? Why is Norway investing? What about Denmark? What about France, Germany, right? They're all investing not just because of the national security implications on the security side, but they know where that'll end up. They're investing because this is the next big economy. And everybody outside the US missed out on the internet for the most part. And nobody wants to miss out on quantum, right? So that leads us to, I keep preaching about AI, and what I think is a quantum leap is what's the role of intelligent agents in this day? And so again, I think we are seeing now the convergence of AI and quantum computing, and I think it will lead to the greatest scientific revolution ever, more discovery. I think about, Africa as a continent losing the ability by 34% to produce agriculture. That's huge. I think about the pandemic we had and the future pandemics we might have, and the trillions of dollars of economic that cost, and how that affected people around the globe that may not have even been involved, right? May not get sick, still hurt by that. I think about the 1 in 6 deaths that are cancer, and how we all talk about, we'd love to say I can't find cancer and somebody's gonna find a cure for cancer. First of all, there's so many kinds of cancer. I hate when people say that and say, which cancer are you talking about? But like, wouldn't it be great to do that? I don't care about making batteries better. I care about completely new forms of energy. I don't care about, curing diseases. I care about the elimination of disease, right? This is the kind of power that we're talking about with quantum computing and AI. And so, why do I think artificial intelligence changes everything? Because I think in the very near future, a 13-year-old, boy or girl, probably a girl, win a Nobel Prize solving a problem she knows nothing about because she has an AI co-scientist and a quantum computing infrastructure program on. I do. I mean, it sounds funny. I see that happening. I look at my 7 and 9-year-old, who since they were 2 and 3 would come down in the kitchen before school or before daycare and say, hey, Google, blah, 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 blah. That's just the way they think. That's the way they work. Those kids are AI natives, and that's going to be a huge advantage for them, right? It's going to take everything I can to keep up and stay ahead of them. And I think about this ability, things like Google's Gemini, where you can just say, hey, go deep research this problem, or Google's co-scientist. We can generate a completely new scientific idea, go through that, okay? Get a whole white paper, build a whole corpus of information on it, and then feed that to an AI and say, hey, we should put that on a quantum computer, right? And run it. Like, that's the world that we're living in. And so when I think about what agents do, I think about, automated circuit and design and optimization. I think about computers designing computers because the quantum mechanics is difficult. I think about solving that error correction, reducing that noise in those systems, right? That'd be really great. And I think about optimizing the experiments themselves. How can we use things like Gen AI to create gates and circuits to run on quantum computers, see how they ran, and then use Gen AI to reconfigure those, just like you would with, a bad image generation. I know you've all done in like ChatGPT or whatever. You're like, show me a person from Austin, make it more Austin, even more Austin. I know you guys have all seen that, but if you're doing that for solving some of the world's greatest problems, I think that's awesome. I also that AI becomes better with quantum. AI will very quickly reach, even if we reach AGI, especially if we reach superintelligence, limitations of the compute infrastructure we have. And so I think if an AI had a compute that could see all the potential possibilities and outcomes at the same time, it would use it in completely different ways than we would. But do absolutely amazing things, right? Super intelligence is probably the last thing we ever create. Might not be a bad thing, might be a horrible thing, but in between there's this ability to do faster, more complex pattern recognition and reasoning, right? Accelerating our search and our optimization, how we interact with these machines. And then, I think in the not too distant future, when we get enough qubits, I think you have native AI that's quantum, right? And I think that's what does the things I just talked about. And I think you have completely new paradigms of intelligence and what we look as intelligence. In April of 2023, I got a really awesome email in hindsight, and it said, His Holiness, blah, 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 blah. Basically, the Pope would like you to come to the Vatican and talk about quantum computing. The details are in the attached PDF. And I said, delete. A lot of times. But when I was there, I gave a talk. It's online. It's literally on, they have a YouTube channel. And I don't know how I'm still on it because I thought they would have deleted it. But I gave a talk called On the Arrogance of Man in the Age of Thinking Machines. And how we put all of these, it's going to be like Terminator. It's going to kill us all. Or, you know what I hate? These reports you see where they say, the machine manipulated the humans, including blackmail. And you're like, right, well, what'd you program it to do? And it's like, use everything up to and including blackmail. It's like, well, you just programmed the computer to do that. Like, of course it did that, right? It didn't come up with that on its own. I think that, we're not thinking about intelligence from the right viewpoint. We're putting too much of, our arrogance on that, on how we predict it, on what we look at, on everything. And I think it ends up being something completely different. And I think it leads to not the development of a new technology, but the birth of literally potentially a new species. And there's a big argument we could have about that, but that requires a lot of drinks. So based on our quantum future, right? Preparing you for tomorrow, what can you do? And with that, I think there's 3 really practical steps. All those frameworks are out there. There's a ton more. If you're a developer, go play with them, right? If you're just a person who has nothing, just has an interest in it, guess what? It's gonna be a whole industry, and they're gonna need marketing and accounting and all the things every other industry needs. So there's plenty of room for everybody to participate in this in some way. I think you should experiment. I think you can go right now to Google Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude or whatever and say, explain to me like a 5-year-old, or build me a quantum circuit, or do whatever, and it will do those things. And I can tell you if those things ran really effectively and all, then everybody would be doing that. But you can learn a lot. You can do a lot of stuff. And you can start preparing your teams as business leaders and as businesses for knowing this is there. Like quantum inspired is a great gateway drug to start thinking about quantum mechanics, but using it in a classical format, right? And so I think the big things that not enough people are thinking about are the security implications, but not from the standpoint of it breaking encryption, but the standpoint of, wow, you could figure out a lot of stuff with AI and quantum, and maybe some of it is not stuff people should be figuring out, right? There's a lot of, and that leads right into the next thing, which is ethical concerns and need for some ethical frameworks, because science is going to become unhinged, and it's going to happen before 2035. I guarantee it. I'll take that bet all day long. It could happen before 2030. All right. And how we all as a society participate in that, decide we want to use it and do things, those become really, really important. And so I want to encourage all of you to embrace this revolution. And I'm going to give you a couple of takeaways, and we should be, Jay, I think that's like nailing it right at 45 minutes. No, well, we're going to do Q&A, right? 15 of that. So the first one is, yeah, it's rapidly advancing. It's got huge potential to change everything. You should go learn everything about it. You can. The second is, I really want you to think of quantum and AI having to go together. Like, I think they're two sides of the same coin. I think it's really, really important. And I think that it has an evolving role in accelerating the quantum progress on what we understand about it and helping us program the machines and all of those things. And the third thing is, it's important for everyone to be a part of this. That's really, really important to me. It's why I didn't write a book on quantum mechanics for computer scientists. I wrote quantum computing for babies, and it's super popular with CTOs between the age of 35 and 56. And then I wrote the dummies book. And in the dummies book, do not write me about the first mathematical formula read in here, because some editor, it was edited by someone at a national lab and a bunch of people, and then someone made a typo. And if I get one more email about that, I'm like, it's obviously wrong. But we're going to be working on the second edition soon, so that should be great. And so, explore the resources that are out there. Go experiment with everything, and more importantly, connect with the community. You don't need to be a quantum physicist to do that. You don't need to be a computer scientist to do that. There are so many places for you to learn and go and grow what you understand about this industry. And I think that's really, really vital. And keep in mind that it's a global initiative and needs to remain. Right now, I hate when people get invited to the White House or Parliament or whatever, and they start talking about security because there's somebody in there that does import-export control, and they're like, ooh, maybe that country shouldn't have those things. And there are not enough people involved in the space. Companies like Google have employees all over the world. So does every other quantum company. We have to. I have employees in Scotland, and England, and Japan, and everywhere, because I'm trying to find the best talent. It's not all in our backyard, and you can't just all grow it homegrown. So it's something that you really have to think of as a very global initiative. And for all of you that are here in person, obviously, hopefully all from Austin, we have an amazing hub that's built here. We started Strangeworks, so it was nobody here. There's 9, 10, 12 quantum companies here now. And we worked with my buddy Phil and INQ to recently pass House Bill 40, I always forget the number, 4751. I always get it dyslexic, which is to create a Texas quantum initiative. And this is to get the state of Texas to invest funding in the universities and the startups, the companies, get a quantum ecosystem going here. And it passed through the Senate and the House. And so it's going to the governor's desk to be signed. And so hopefully that will create a lot of educational opportunities like we talked about. Hopefully that'll create a lot of, opportunity for people to explore the technology and use it from a business perspective to help get startups going, build a kind of Texas as a quantum hub. And specifically, all due respect from anybody, not Austin, right? So I think of it more of an Austin thing than a Texas thing, but that's just me. And so think of this as your invitation to think bigger than binary, to really go out and do something exciting with this, to learn about it, to be a part of it. I mean, it doesn't matter. Maybe you're a marketing person, you have a great idea to simplify the way we explain it to people. That's super useful. Maybe you're a finance person that can help manage a business better. You don't have to be a physicist or computer scientist to be involved in this revolution. And thanks to AI, you may not need to be a computer scientist or a physicist to actually be leading the revolution. So with that, I'm going to open it to Q&A. Jay, 15 minutes or so, you said? All right, so I'll open it to Q&A, and I thank you all for your time. So you have like a magic question thing?
So there was one error in Whurley's previous comments. In addition to the math error, he neglected to mention that Texas Quantum Initiative, a lot of the discussions happened at my bar.
Oh,
I think that should
I
have.
mean,
I think that should have been mentioned.
I just want to say, I for days have been like, I gotta make sure to mention Jay's bar, and then today he goes, "There's too many
I'll
people."
show you
Don't.
the table. If
He
it
goes,
gets
"There's."
funded,
He goes, "There's
gets
too many."
flat.
He goes, "There's too many people. Don't mention the bar." So that was I believe I was asked to omit that. So what do you have question wise?
All right. So we only have one. Oh, we'll just swap on this. All right. So lots of great questions. I'm not going to ask this multiverse question. Sorry, John Costello. Whurley will make fun of things if I do that. We'll talk about that at the bar afterwards. Let's ask this one. Actually, I'm going to ask Craig Wheeler's question first because it relates to it. You mentioned quantum and AI several times. Are you talking about LLM and current deep learning based AI when you keep talking about the interplay of these two? Or are you thinking beyond that to other forms of AI?
So 100% thinking beyond that. LLMs are great. I'm thinking more starting with like large reasoning models, which are just now kind of coming out, and some work, some don't. I think Apple wrote a great paper on how maybe they don't reason, right? Which is very interesting if you haven't read it. Everybody saw it as like Apple saying like, we're behind on AI, so on AI. But if you read the paper, you're like, wow, this is extremely smart people there, and it's really good research. So, where I'm thinking about is it getting to a point where there's an AGI, I think happens fairly soon. And I'm thinking of not a super intelligence, but kind of like a sort of intelligence where I'm literally just like, I have an idea and I'm like, hey, I have this idea, blah, 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 using things like co-scientists to go research it, pulling it into things like Gemini and thinking through it and doing deep research and coming out with answers. But I do think that all of you in the next 5 years are developers. Like if you are a software developer in the room and you have not started thinking about your next career, now would be a really good time. I promise you, because like I'm terrified, and I have all my friends are like, it'll never replace me, and here's why. And it's like there's going to be a lot fewer developers that are not 100x developers, 10x, 100x. They could be 1000x, 100,000x, and they're going to know how to manage all those tools and a whole team of agents doing stuff. And so that agentic approach is what I really think about right now.
All right, I'm going to ask this one because it's funny and self-deprecating. Murley Rahm asks, Whurley covered this topic in his book. Curious why he thinks supply chain optimization is not a target or less focused for quantum computing. I am building a supply chain platform, so it's personal.
No, look, we do that for people. Supply chain optimization is a fine thing. Anything that is significantly complex, we usually talk about quantum problems, we describe them as intractable problems, right? Meaning that we don't really have the compute technology to do it. Now, people use a traveling salesman, horrible example, but it is easy to relate, which is we all want to go to 14 cities, and I type on Jay's computer and make a little program, and in a few thousand seconds, the evaluation time completes, and we get an answer of what the most optimized path is with all those variables. And we go to 22 cities, a difference of 8, that same computer takes thousands of years. Right? And we go to 28 cities, it takes longer than the time of the known universe. Again, not my favorite example, but one that's easy for the room. But that's an example of an intractable problem. So everybody's very focused on that. If you talk to many of my friends in the quantum industry, they'll be like, it's going to be used for every problem. And I think it's going to take a little bit to get there, but supply chain, we do that for 6 companies today and do supply chain optimization. And also really big, like, I have to be careful because here's the Achilles heel of my company. No customer allows us to talk about anything we do. So if they wrote one white paper or published one article, like we'd have $1 billion. But if you look at it, there are a bunch of hard and soft constraints, and not just supply chains, but the things that are underlying the supply chains, and those are huge problem spaces for going with that.
All right. Let's see. Next question. I'm going to ask, do you think quantum will have an impact on the creative economy? If so, what implications do you anticipate? For example, artists making art or music on quantum computers, video/film editing on quantum computers, or even streamers using quantum computers?
So I already have 3 friends that make quantum music, and they're different variants. Some of them are taking the sounds of the dilution fridge and all this stuff and making music. Others of them, one of my best friends, McKenna, takes the circuits and uses them to manipulate sound. It's super cool. So that's happening already. I want to hesitate to say, creatives are in the same position as software developers. And be like, it's all going to be okay. But have you guys seen what these guys did with VO3? It's definitely not okay. So you'll all be creatives using every quantum computer and computer and whatever to do cool stuff. Like, the world is changing, at such an unbelievably rapid pace. There was a company, I can't remember the name of it, that did a commercial during a televised sports game, basketball game, I think, and that entire commercial was made in AI. All prompted. And there's so many great examples. If you want to see one that really get your head going, there's one it's got a void in it. I'll find it and I'll post it in the forum. So everybody sign up on that forum site. But it basically is the AI actors, and it's like nobody knows what happens once the prompt is done, and they're basically like, we get selected for roles we never picked. Like, if you're born sick, you stay sick. If you're born old, you stay old. And it really twists your head on the whole creative aspect.
All right, I asked a creative question, so now I'm going to go flip to the other side and ask a strongly physics question. First, though, it might need some background. Did everybody get from Whurley's talk that we're dealing with qubits, which have binary measured states, but they have this weird fuzzy property, which now enables them to do this essentially quantum parallelism through superposition and entanglement until you measure them? So all the machines he mentioned, all the modalities he mentioned, ion trap, neutral atom, superconducting qubits, et cetera, they're all based on these binary qubits, even though the computations are not limited to binary like in a classical system. Did you all get that part? Wait, hold on. So hold on. The question is, what are your thoughts on qubit quantum computing, D to the N, where D is greater than 2, and will it overtake qubit quantum computing? So right now, we're using simple things where you can find one flip state of 2 states.
So I'm excited. I haven't seen one I can use yet, so I still put it in the theoretical standpoint. I put it in the same category as topological, right? But it'd be awesome. I think it would be absolutely great. It's fascinating, but I don't think it's a near-term reality. I think it's going to take a lot of work to get to.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that, and I read that.
Somehow knew exactly where that question.
Yeah, I knew you did. In many ways, we've mapped quantum computing to the paradigms we're used to as much as we can. But there's probably a whole branch of quantum computing waiting to be explored with qubit systems and different ways of thinking about programming, et cetera. The current stuff is hard enough, though, so it's going to be a while before we get to that. Justin Yurka asks, do you think the size of impact of quantum computing is any more or less certain than the impact of AI?
I do think it's more certain. And did someone gasp over there? I heard like a the reason is AI is bound to the technologies we have today to build on it. And again, this is the first advancement in computers, the first new way to compute in the history of computing. And so I think about like the internet, and Barnes and Noble was like, internet website, we have stores everywhere, and I think that's kind of the attitude of some of my friends in the AI community who are like, AI is great, it's the greatest thing, it's everything. AI will more than likely use quantum computation to build systems that are even beyond everything we know about quantum and AI. But because of its impact, because it is a completely new way to compute, I do think it will have more of an impact. And again, I think AI and quantum are two sides of the same coin. So I don't really like separating them all for that comparison at all. But if I measured the impact, we know what AI can do. We know the jobs it's going to eliminate. We know the new things it might create. We know all of these things. We've talked about it. AI since, for literally, decades. Now we're like, oh, here's a completely new way to do compute. And I think it's just such a unbelievably wide open field that it's created, that it's going to have more of an impact.
By the way, I should add that there's a whole school of thought that quantum will not help with AI anywhere in the near future due to data limitations as well. So it's a really interesting debate. And if you want to hear the flip side of Whurley's optimism, and by the way, I don't know, because the people on the other side are my friends too, and I don't know which side I'm on in this, but if you want to hear the flip side, the Google Cloud Advanced Computing community has online sessions. They're broadcast live and then recorded and put on YouTube. And we have one coming up on July 1st at 11 a.m. Central Time. So it's a Tuesday at 11 a.m. with Bob Sorensen, who Whurley knows well, and Bob Suter, Dr. Bob Suter, another one of the leading thought leaders in quantum computing. And they're going to argue the exact opposite. I already know it because they hinted at it in part one of the conversation. So you could go look at their previous conversation. Part one is on our YouTube channel for the Google Cloud Advanced Computing community. And part two, where they're really going to dive into the AI part, is on that. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting work at the intersection of quantum AI. Now, by the way, Google Research's quantum unit is called Google Quantum AI. So there's a lot of different views on this. I just wanted to bring that up. Okay, Doug Norton asks, how can quantum computing apply to everything, especially apps requiring lots of data when a QC system has no memory?
I mean, Doug's not allowed to answer ask questions, right? I think, did we agree with that? Wasn't that one of our?
We're going to let Doug go.
All right. No, I mean, right now, sure. But I mean, you're talking about, again, let's go back to 1959, the integrated circuit, and be like, we have an integrated circuit. And people are like, why isn't it as powerful as an iPhone in the future? It's like, it's not where it's at. But again, we are on the precipice of that advancing extremely, extremely fast. And you're already seeing hybrid computation between like HPC and quantum, where maybe use quantum to reduce a problem space or remove bias from a data set or whatever before it goes in HPC. So again, when I look at it, the future is quantum heavy. It's probably maybe even quantum first, but it's heterogeneous, right? The goal of everybody working to build computation should be computational orchestration. How do we take a problem, break it down to first principles, and send that part of the problem to that processor, which is going to be the best, better, faster, cheaper to get that answer back. So yeah, right now it is, but I mean, that's kind of the equivalent of me saying, well, my TI-99 4A doesn't run Microsoft Word. It's like, it's just not where we're at in evolution, and it's going to change really fast. I mean, it wasn't that long ago I was like, ooh, 10 qubits. That's amazing. And it's going to just get better and better and faster and faster.
Great. All right. Abhijna Balu asks, quantum error correction seems essential, but it also adds a massive overhead. Do you think scalable quantum computing is achievable without fundamentally new error correction paradigms? And Abhijna, I think she's in here. She might be one of the overflow rooms. I think she works for Google, and I know Google made an announcement about that you referenced that was one of the step functions.
Yeah, I mean, look, of course, error correction is overhead. Again, a lot of these questions, this is where I think part of our confusion around quantum is that we keep trying to take all this, I would like to say you're thinking too classically, right? Or maybe if you really want to upset classical, we'd be like, you're thinking kind of like how an antique computer works. But, all of those things are problems. And yes, there's overhead and all of that, but there's overhead on my iPhone to do error correction, right? These are all problems that get solved in the not too distant future. I mean, you've got many companies saying they'll be at 1 million qubits by 2027 to 2029. That's not that far in the future, right? And so, error correction, I think Google's paper did a really good job on it. I think there's a lot of other really good work going on in that area. Yeah, of course it's overhead, but I think it's also really important to understand, again, where we're at in a moment in time, right? I could go around and trash every piece of hardware for something, right? Easily. But that's if I'm looking at it from the perspective of, well, I have this other computer and why doesn't this thing do those? And it's like, it's not necessarily built to do that thing, and we're still building them.
This also relates to the fragility of quantum systems, but in a different way. Andrew Steinberg asks, can you speak to the stability / requirements needed to operate the quantum computers, and if the conditions are improving outside of the requirement of frozen environments to keep the systems operational, as an example?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of computers. I mean, I see the I and Q guys right here. They work at room temperature, right? So they don't have to do that, right? Ion traps, using lasers. There's also systems using lasers to cool things. So it's, again, there's not a lot of standardization. There are 24 ways to make a qubit. And we're going to learn in the not too distant future which ones scale better than others, which ones work better than others. But if you look at it, all of them have been continually progressing in the number of qubits, the quality of fidelity of qubits, and the length of time of entanglement for decoherence. There's measurable progress almost across the board. Some a lot more impressive than others, but I think it's changed, and it's changing every time. Oh, that was 15 minutes. No more questions. I'm just kidding.
All right, you all are submitting questions so fast, I'm having trouble finding them. But I remember the next one I wanted to ask was, if quantum computers can solve future quantum computing systems that have more qubits, if those quantum computing systems can solve problems that are completely intractable by classical systems, how do you test them? How do you know the answers are right?
Oh, you run the answer a whole bunch of times, and you're like, oh yeah, we ran one problem 48,000 times. And we're like, here's the average of I mean, that's the truth. Look, eventually you'll have the systems that it's the same as computers, right? We asked the same question about classical semiconductor-based silicon machines 30 years ago. So you'll get there. And by the way, right now, classical computers are a big part of operating and maintaining and running quantum machines. Right? So, you may very well have some kind of hybrid compute system that helps you validate those answers and do those things. But again, these things are here. Jensen from NVIDIA came out in December or January at CES and said, quantum computers 20 years away, nobody worry about it. And Alan at D-Wave posted a blog post the next day. It was like, he's wrong, I've had it for 10 years or whatever. And somebody else said it's 3 years away. And, Google's saying 2029. They're all right. It depends on what kind of there's no standardization. It depends on what kind of quantum computer you're talking about. If you're talking about a general purpose room temperature quantum computer that has 4 million qubits, that might be 20 years away. I don't know, right? But this is important to understand that everyone that tells you something about a quantum computer, and for the most part, everybody in this industry is pretty honest about their stuff, okay? They're probably right. And when you talk to somebody else, they're going to tell you why they're wrong, right? It's a very nascent. It's important to know the moment of time we're in. We're kind of a little past the integrated circuit. We're not quite to the homebrew compute club, but we're on the border of that.
All right, we're getting close to the end, so I'm going to ask some questions that I know whurley's answers are going to be quick to. Ravi asks, if quantum computing becomes widely accessible, how will we ensure cybersecurity and data privacy, especially since quantum computers could potentially break current encryption methods? I think the key is in the word current.
Well, one of the things, and not to harp on my buddy Phil and David from IonQ, but they do more than computing, they do networking. And a lot of companies do right now. And so it's not just about quantum computers and breaking encryption, it's about a quantum internet, which you can go Google and read plenty of examples about. And there's things in Chicago and California and elsewhere in the world where they're doing these repeaters and setting up this information. And the way it works based on quantum mechanics is there's 2 entangled parts that, in theory, could communicate faster than, light speed or whatever Einstein called spooky at a distance. But that if I observe it, the simple act of observing it breaks it. And so I don't get your information. So all of those rules are going to change.
Yeah, actually, we're at 7:40 and I have a few final announcements. So I'm going to ask the winning question now. It's Melissa Kashi. Is she in this room? Melissa Kashi? Right there. All right, congratulations. I'm going to ask you a question. What is your advice to business, political, and educational leaders today about how to build a labor force that is skilled in quantum computing, besides funding the Texas Quantum Initiative and having more meetings at Remedy Bar?
Okay. You heard when I was like, I don't have an answer to this. If you meet me on the street and all that, I mean, I kind of answered that one. No, I don't know. I've been meeting with governments around the world. I think, we need a lot more community in quantum outside of physicists and outside of our core group. I think that we need a lot more. I feel like it's not quite an OTA feedback loop. I feel like you've got the scientists doing the fundamental research, and you've got hardware companies building it, and you got software companies with the interfaces on it. This whole other side of the circle is missing, right? There's no customer complaining about it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, and oh, okay, why? And then we go and learn that, or I can't hire people to use this machine that you're selling me access to, right? So again, I don't have, and I really just want to be clear, congrats on your badge, but I thought I said I didn't have the answer to this. I've like 100 witnesses right now, but it's a super difficult problem. Do they invest in getting more students into universities to study physics? Do you create a workforce like what the World Economic Forum is saying, where you kind of get businesses that are starting to hire people just to focus on this? Does it happen in an innovation department? It's a very hard question. And the fact is between it and AI and both of them advancing so fast, there's things that I would have told you 2 years ago that now would be completely irrelevant. There's things I would tell you now that probably be relevant in 6 months. The pace of technology is changing at a breakneck pace that nobody is really paying attention to because it's inertial, right? It's been happening underneath in an undercurrent for 20 years, right? With quantum mechanics for 125 years. And so we haven't been paying attention. We haven't seen the effects of it. It's kind of like a tsunami. But like in the next few years between now and 2030, all the water in the ocean is going to pull way back, and we better all be prepared. And I'm willing to work with any organization. If you have some, I'll talk to anybody about it and brainstorm. And I've done it all over the world, but I haven't seen one answer come out of there that said, ooh, that is demonstrable that it'll work. It is replicatable in all these other places, and it's something that can be executed on without having to go to a government and say, we need $10 billion for quantum education or whatever. I just have not seen any of those things.
All right, let's give Whurley a round of applause.